The morning of December 7, 1941, dawned with deceptive tranquility over the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Rear Admiral Husband Edward Kimmel stood on the bridge of his flagship, gazing across the serene waters of Pearl Harbor where the United States Pacific Fleet lay anchored in what military strategists called Battleship Row. The gentle trade winds carried the scent of plumeria blossoms, and the crystalline waters reflected the imposing silhouettes of 8 mighty battleships that represented America's naval supremacy in the Pacific. Commander Joseph Kenneth Taussig, Jr. had risen early that Sunday, as was his custom aboard the USS Nevada. The 29-year-old officer possessed an intuitive understanding of naval warfare that had earned him respect among his peers. As he reviewed the morning reports, nothing seemed amiss. The harbor bustled with routine activity. Sailors preparing for shore leave, maintenance crews conducting their weekly inspections, and officers attending chapel services aboard their vessels. 350 miles northwest of Oahu, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo commanded a strike force that had been sailing in radio silence for 13 days. His fleet consisted of 6 aircraft carriers accompanied by battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, the most formidable naval aviation force ever assembled. The Japanese had spent months planning this audacious operation, codenamed Operation Hawaii, later known to history as the attack on Pearl Harbor. According to historical accounts documented in Samuel Eliot Morrison's comprehensive 15-volume History of United States Naval Operations in World War II, the Japanese strike force had maintained absolute secrecy during their approach, avoiding all shipping lanes and maintaining strict communications blackout. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, leading the first wave of Japanese aircraft, had studied reconnaissance photographs of Pearl Harbor for weeks. Every detail of the American base was etched in his memory: the exact positions of battleships, the locations of fuel storage facilities, and the patterns of American patrol aircraft. His orders were explicit: achieve complete tactical surprise and cripple the Pacific Fleet's capability to interfere with Japanese expansion throughout the Pacific. The strategic importance of Pearl Harbor could not be overstated. This naval base served as the forward headquarters of the Pacific Fleet, America's primary deterrent against Japanese aggression in the region. The harbor's deep waters could accommodate the largest warships, while its repair facilities and fuel storage tanks made it an indispensable logistics hub. For Japan's military leadership, neutralizing Pearl Harbor represented the key to achieving their broader objectives in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack plan, understood that Japan's industrial capacity could never match America's long-term production capabilities. His strategy depended on delivering such a devastating blow that the United States would seek a negotiated peace rather than commit to a prolonged Pacific War. Yamamoto famously predicted that Japan could run wild for 6 months to a year, but beyond that time frame, he held little confidence in ultimate victory. As dawn approached on that fateful Sunday morning, the stage was set for an event that would fundamentally alter the course of world history. The American servicemen at Pearl Harbor remained unaware that their peaceful morning would soon erupt into chaos, transforming their naval base from a symbol of American power into the crucible where a new era of global warfare would be forged. The attack on Pearl Harbor would not only bring the United States fully into World War II, but would also demonstrate the revolutionary potential of carrier-based aviation, forever changing naval strategy and international relations. At precisely 6:45 in the morning, Commander Fuchida's voice crackled over the radio frequencies of the first attack wave. "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The code phrase indicating that complete tactical surprise had been achieved. 183 Japanese aircraft swept across the northern shores of Oahu, their engines creating a thunderous roar that shattered the peaceful Sunday morning silence. Seaman First Class James Richard Ward was enjoying breakfast aboard the USS Oklahoma when the first bombs began falling. The initial explosions seemed distant and almost surreal, perhaps another military exercise, he thought. But when the distinctive red circles of the rising sun became visible on aircraft wings diving toward Battleship Row, the horrifying reality struck him like a physical blow. The Japanese attack unfolded with methodical precision. Nakajima Kate torpedo bombers skimmed across the harbor's surface at masthead height, They're specially modified torpedoes designed to run in Pearl Harbor's shallow waters. Aichi-Val dive bombers screamed down from 8,000 feet, targeting the massive battleships with armor-piercing bombs converted from 16-inch naval shells. Mitsubishi Zero fighters strafed airfields, destroying American aircraft lined up in neat rows, an arrangement intended to prevent sabotage, but which now made them perfect targets. Admiral Kimmel watched in stunned disbelief as his fleet came under attack. The USS Arizona, pride of the Pacific Fleet, suffered a catastrophic explosion when a bomb penetrated her forward magazine. The blast lifted the 32,000-ton battleship completely out of the water before she settled back. With her forward section obliterated, 1,177 sailors and Marines perished in that single moment of destruction. Aboard the USS Nevada, Lieutenant Commander Francis John Thomas had the presence of mind to order his ship to get underway. The Nevada became the only battleship to attempt escape from the harbor during the attack. As she steamed past the burning Arizona, her crew could see the inferno consuming their sister ship. Japanese pilots, recognizing the strategic importance of preventing any battleship from reaching the open sea, concentrated their attacks on the Nevada. Rather than risk blocking the harbor channel if his ship sank, Thomas deliberately grounded the Nevada on Hospital Point. The USS Oklahoma suffered a different but equally tragic fate. Struck by multiple torpedoes on her port side, she began listing severely. As water flooded her compartments, the Oklahoma rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of sailors inside her overturned hull. Some would survive for days in air pockets, tapping on the hull plates to signal rescue crews working frantically to cut through the steel. Chief Petty Officer John William Finn manned a .50 caliber machine gun at Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station, despite being wounded multiple times by strafing attacks. His heroic defense of the airfield would later earn him the Medal of Honor. But at the moment, he was simply a sailor doing his duty, while Japanese bullets tore through his position. The second wave of Japanese aircraft arrived at 8:54, consisting of 170 planes. By this time, American defenders had recovered from their initial shock and were returning fire with everything available. Anti-aircraft guns that had been unmanned during the first wave now blazed away at the attacking aircraft. Some American pilots managed to get airborne, including Second Lieutenant George Samuel Welch and Second Lieutenant Kenneth Marvin Taylor, who shot down several Japanese planes while flying Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. The attack lasted approximately 2 hours, but its effects would resonate throughout the remainder of the 20th century. When the last Japanese aircraft disappeared over the horizon, Pearl Harbor resembled a scene from Dante's Inferno. Black smoke billowed thousands of feet into the tropical sky, oil fires burned on the water's surface, and the proud Pacific Fleet lay shattered in the harbor that had been considered America's most secure naval base. As the thunder of Japanese engines faded into the distance, Pearl Harbor transformed into a theater of heroism amid unprecedented devastation. The oil-slicked waters reflected towering columns of black smoke, while sailors and Marines emerged from the chaos to mount rescue, operations that would become legendary in naval history. Seaman First Class Carl Timothy Carson dove repeatedly into the burning harbor waters, pulling wounded shipmates from the flaming oil that covered the surface like a deadly blanket. Despite suffering severe burns on his hands and face, Carson continued his rescue efforts for over 3 hours, saving 17 men before collapsing from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. His actions exemplified the courage displayed by hundreds of servicemen who transformed from victims into heroes within moments of the attack's conclusion. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg remained at his post aboard the USS Arizona, even as the battleship's forward magazines exploded around him. Witnesses reported seeing the captain directing damage control efforts until the very moment when the Arizona's superstructure collapsed in flames. His body was never recovered, but his dedication to duty inspired countless others who survived the attack to continue fighting despite seemingly hopeless circumstances. The USS California, flagship of the Pacific Fleet's battle force, settled slowly into the harbor mud as her crew fought desperately to save their ship. Ensign Herbert Sharpio Jones organized bucket brigades to remove water from flooded compartments while simultaneously directing anti-aircraft fire at the second wave of Japanese attackers. The California's crew managed to keep her afloat for 3 days before she finally settled on the harbor bottom, but their efforts preserved enough of the ship's structure to enable her eventual salvage and return to service. Hospital Corpsman. Third Class William August Schonland moved through the carnage aboard the Oklahoma, administering first aid to wounded sailors trapped in the overturned battleship's compartments. Working by flashlight in spaces filled with fuel oil and seawater, Schonland treated injuries while coordinating with rescue crews cutting through the hull from outside. His medical expertise saved dozens of lives in conditions that would have challenged experienced surgeons in fully equipped hospitals. As documented in Walter Lord's definitive account, Day of Infamy, published in 1957, the civilian population of Hawaii also demonstrated remarkable courage during and after the attack. Dr. Pinkerton and other physicians at Tripler Army Hospital worked for 72 consecutive hours, treating wounded servicemen, performing surgery without adequate supplies while Japanese aircraft strafed the medical facility. The harbor tug USS Hoga, commanded by Lieutenant Commander George Henry Merry, steamed directly into the inferno surrounding Battleship Row to fight fires and assist damaged vessels. Despite her small size, the Hoga positioned herself alongside burning battleships, using her firefighting equipment to battle blazes that threatened to spread throughout the harbor. The tug's crew ignored the constant danger of explosions from ammunition and fuel storage areas, focusing entirely on their mission to save ships and lives. Chief Aviation Ordnance Man John William McCloy organized the defense of Ford Island's ammunition depot despite being wounded in the initial attack. Recognizing that an explosion at the facility would devastate rescue operations throughout the harbor, McCloy positioned his men to defend the depot while simultaneously fighting fires that threatened nearby aircraft hangars. His leadership prevented a secondary disaster that could have doubled the attack's casualty toll. The psychological impact of these heroic actions extended far beyond their immediate tactical importance. American servicemen who had been caught, completely unprepared, demonstrated that surprise and initial defeat could not break their fighting spirit. These individual acts of courage would become the foundation upon which America built its response to Japanese aggression throughout the Pacific War. Radio operators worked frantically to re-establish communications with Washington, while medics treated wounds that ranged from minor burns to traumatic amputations. The harbor's machine shops, undamaged by the attack, immediately began producing repair parts for vessels that could be salvaged. Admiral Yamamoto's tactical masterpiece had achieved every immediate objective except the most crucial one. The Pearl Harbor attack failed to destroy America's resolve, instead forging it into an unbreakable weapon of retribution. Within hours of the attack's conclusion, the strategic miscalculation inherent in Japan's plan became apparent to thoughtful observers on both sides of the Pacific. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt received the first reports of the attack while having lunch at the White House. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox's initial telephone call conveyed the shocking news that Pearl Harbor was under attack, but the full scope of the disaster would not become clear for several hours. Roosevelt's immediate response revealed his understanding of the attack's historical significance. This was not merely a military setback, but a fundamental transformation of America's relationship with the world. The Japanese strike force had achieved remarkable tactical success. 18 American warships had been sunk or damaged, including 8 battleships that represented the backbone of Pacific Fleet strength. 347 aircraft had been destroyed or damaged, most while still on the ground. American casualties totaled 3,435, including 2,403 killed. By any measure of military effectiveness, the Pearl Harbor attack represented one of history's most successful surprise operations. However, the strategic consequences proved disastrously counterproductive for Japan. The attack united American public opinion as no political leader could have accomplished through speeches or propaganda. Isolationist sentiment, which had prevented American entry into the European War despite 18 months of German aggression, evaporated in the smoke rising from Pearl Harbor's burning battleships. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding American forces in the Philippines, recognized immediately that Pearl Harbor represented both catastrophe and opportunity. The attack had eliminated America's surface fleet advantage in the Pacific, but it had also guaranteed that America would mobilize its full industrial capacity for war against Japan. MacArthur understood that Japan's initial victories would be temporary, lasting only until American production could replace the losses sustained at Pearl Harbor. The attack's timing proved particularly unfortunate for Japanese strategic objectives. American aircraft carriers, the weapons that would ultimately determine the Pacific War's outcome, were absent from Pearl Harbor during the attack. The USS Enterprise was returning from Wake Island. The USS Lexington was ferrying aircraft to Midway Island, and the USS Saratoga was undergoing maintenance on the American West Coast. These three ships would form the nucleus of America's Pacific Fleet recovery. According to intelligence analyses declassified decades later and referenced in John Toland's comprehensive study, The Rising Sun, The Decline and Fall of the Japanese Empire, Japanese planners had grossly underestimated America's capacity for industrial mobilization and technological innovation. They assumed that American society, focused on consumer goods and civilian comfort, lacked the discipline necessary for sustained military production. Admiral Chester William Nimitz, appointed to command the Pacific Fleet after Admiral Kimmel's relief, assessed the strategic situation with characteristic clarity. The Pearl Harbor attack had eliminated America's battleship advantage, but it had also demonstrated that aircraft carriers, not battleships, would determine naval supremacy in the Pacific. This recognition would guide American naval strategy. Throughout the war, the Japanese attack had also failed to destroy Pearl Harbor's infrastructure. The harbor's dry docks, repair facilities, fuel storage tanks, and submarine base remained largely intact. These installations would prove crucial for America's Pacific offensive operations, providing forward logistics support that would have been impossible to establish if the facilities had been destroyed. Perhaps most significantly, the Pearl Harbor attack transformed World War II from a European conflict with Pacific complications into a truly global war. Roosevelt's decision to prioritize the European theater while maintaining defensive operations in the Pacific required a level of military production that exceeded even America's vast industrial capacity, forcing technological innovations that would reshape warfare permanently. The attack's psychological impact on American society created a national unity unprecedented since the Civil War. Regional differences, political partisanship, and economic disputes became secondary to the overriding objective of defeating Japan and its Axis allies. The morning of December 8, 1941, witnessed a transformation in American society that historians would later describe as the nation's true coming of age as a global superpower. President Roosevelt's address to Congress requesting a declaration of war against Japan marked not merely America's entry into World War II, but the emergence of a fundamentally different nation from the one that had been attacked just 24 hours earlier. Roosevelt's speech, delivered to a joint session of Congress at 12:30 in the afternoon, contained the phrase that would define American memory of Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy. The president's words resonated throughout a nation still struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the previous day's events. Within 1 hour of Roosevelt's address, Congress passed the declaration of war by overwhelming margins, unanimity in the Senate, and only one dissenting vote in the House of Representatives. The American industrial mobilization that followed Pearl Harbor exceeded even the most optimistic projections of military planners. Automotive plants in Detroit began converting production lines from civilian automobiles to military vehicles within weeks of the attack. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run facility, originally designed to produce B-24 Liberator bombers at an unprecedented rate, became a symbol of American industrial determination. Henry John Kaiser revolutionized shipbuilding through mass production techniques that reduced the time required to construct Liberty ships from months to weeks. His shipyards in California and Oregon employed hundreds of thousands of workers, including women who had never previously worked in heavy industry. The famous Rosie the Riveter became an iconic representation of American society's total commitment to victory. Admiral Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor on Christmas Day, 1941, to assume command of the Pacific Fleet. His assessment of the situation revealed both the magnitude of the challenge and the opportunities available to American naval forces. The attack had eliminated the Pacific Fleet's surface superiority, but American submarine forces remained intact and ready for offensive operations against Japanese shipping. Captain Edward Lewis Beach, commanding the submarine USS Trigger, represented the new generation of American naval officers who would carry the war to Japan's home waters. Beach and his fellow submarine commanders understood that their vessels constituted America's only immediate means of striking back at Japanese forces. Throughout the Pacific, the submarine campaign that began within days of Pearl Harbor would eventually strangle Japan's economy by destroying the merchant shipping upon which the island nation depended. The attack's impact on American society extended far beyond military mobilization. University research laboratories began focusing on weapons development, leading to scientific advances that would reshape the modern world. The Manhattan Project, while not directly caused by Pearl Harbor, received enormous impetus from the attack's demonstration that America faced enemies capable of devastating surprise attacks, as documented in David McCullough's Pulitzer Prize-winning biography Truman, published in 1992. The Pearl Harbor attack fundamentally altered American perceptions of national security. The continental United States could no longer be considered invulnerable to foreign attack, requiring a forward defense strategy that would maintain American military presence throughout the world. Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle began planning the bombing raid on Japan that would bear his name within weeks of Pearl Harbor. The Doolittle raid, launched from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet in April 1942, demonstrated America's determination to carry the war to Japan's home islands despite the Pacific Fleet's temporary weakness. The Pearl Harbor attack also catalyzed developments in military technology that would characterize warfare throughout the remainder of the 20th century. Radar systems, initially deployed in limited numbers before the attack, received massive funding for improvement and expansion. American electronics companies began developing guidance systems for bombs and missiles that would eventually lead to precision-guided munitions. Naval aviation, proven decisive by the Japanese attack, became the focus of American shipbuilding efforts. The Essex-class aircraft carriers, designed before Pearl Harbor but built in unprecedented numbers afterward, would spearhead America's Pacific offensive operations. These ships incorporated lessons learned from analyzing Japanese carrier operations during the Pearl Harbor attack. The attack's psychological impact created a generation of Americans who understood that their nation's security depended upon maintaining military superiority worldwide. This mindset would influence American foreign policy throughout the Cold War and beyond, establishing the United States as the global hegemon that emerged from World War II. The Pearl Harbor attack's true significance lay not in its immediate tactical success, but in its role as the catalyst that transformed both warfare itself and America's position in the global order. By the war's end in 1945, the world had witnessed the emergence of military technologies and strategic concepts that would dominate international relations for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. The attack demonstrated, conclusively, that aircraft carriers, not battleships, would determine naval supremacy in future conflicts. This lesson guided American naval construction throughout the war, resulting in a fleet of fast aircraft carriers that could project power across vast ocean distances. The Essex-class carriers that spearheaded America's island-hopping campaign across the Pacific incorporated design improvements based directly on observations of Japanese carrier operations during the Pearl Harbor attack. Admiral William Frederick Halsey, Jr., whose Task Force 16 had been returning to Pearl Harbor aboard the USS Enterprise during the attack, embodied the aggressive spirit that characterized America's Pacific offensive. Halsey's famous declaration to "Kill Japs, kill Japs, kill more Japs" reflected the transformation of American strategic thinking from defensive to offensive operations. His carrier task forces would eventually carry the war to Japan's home waters, demonstrating the global reach that aircraft carriers provided to naval forces. The technological innovations sparked by Pearl Harbor extended far beyond naval aviation. Radar systems, primitive and unreliable in 1941, evolved into sophisticated networks capable of detecting approaching aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles. The radar installations that would protect American bases throughout the Pacific incorporated lessons learned from analyzing why the Pearl Harbor radar station's warnings had been ignored, as referenced in historian Samuel Eliot Morrison's authoritative Naval Histories. The Pearl Harbor attack fundamentally altered American strategic doctrine regarding forward defense. The concept of maintaining overseas bases to prevent enemies from approaching American territory became central to Cold War military planning. The network of American military installations that emerged after World War II reflected lessons learned. From Pearl Harbor's vulnerability to surprise attack, the attack's impact on warfare extended to intelligence gathering and analysis. The failure to anticipate the Pearl Harbor attack led to comprehensive reforms in American intelligence operations, including the eventual creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. Code-breaking efforts, which had achieved limited success before the attack, received massive resources and eventually enabled American forces to anticipate Japanese naval movements with remarkable accuracy. Captain Joseph John Rochefort, commanding the Navy's code-breaking unit in Hawaii, exemplified the new emphasis on intelligence operations. His team's breaking of Japanese naval codes enabled Admiral Nimitz to position American forces advantageously during the Battle of Midway, turning the tide of the Pacific War. The intelligence revolution that began after Pearl Harbor would characterize military operations throughout the Cold War. The attack also demonstrated the importance of industrial capacity in modern warfare. Japan's failure to destroy America's industrial infrastructure proved strategically decisive, as American production capacity eventually overwhelmed Japanese military forces through sheer volume of material. The lesson that industrial capacity, not just military skill, determines victory in extended conflicts would influence American strategic planning throughout the Cold War. The Pearl Harbor attack's psychological impact created lasting changes in American society's relationship with military service. The citizen soldiers who fought World War II returned home with an understanding of America's global responsibilities that would shape foreign policy for generations. The GI Bill and other veterans' benefits programs reflected society's recognition that military service had become a pathway to full citizenship and economic opportunity. Modern military historians recognize Pearl Harbor as the beginning of the Pacific century in global affairs. The attack forced America to develop the naval aviation capabilities and logistics systems necessary to project power across the world's largest ocean. These capabilities would prove essential during the Korean War, Vietnam War, and subsequent Pacific conflicts. The attack's ultimate irony lay in its complete strategic failure, despite overwhelming tactical success. Admiral Yamamoto's prediction that Japan could run wild for 6 months proved remarkably accurate. Japanese forces achieved unprecedented conquests throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asia during the first half of 1942. However, his warning that prolonged war with America would prove disastrous for Japan was equally prescient. Pearl Harbor transformed December 7th from an ordinary Sunday into a date that continues to resonate in American memory more than 8 decades later. The attack's legacy extends far beyond its immediate military consequences, representing the moment when America accepted the responsibilities and burdens of global leadership that would define the nation's role throughout the modern era.